You know, he's really he's shameless in intellectual argument. He's absolutely without character, a moral foundation, or even intellectual substance.
Unpacking really sucks, and it's easier to do that when you're not sober.
Why don't you film yourself and call it an unboxing video?
Isn't that just like the title of his OnlyFans account?
I was going to make the exact same joke.
Unbussying video.
Unbussying Ria.
Unbox gapping.
That's just my prolapse, man.
Oh, good start.
My unbussy. This is a podcast about literature.
Yeah, we've never said anything crude or unbecoming on this podcast.
No.
Or, yeah.
No, never.
Or particularly, we've never said anything controversial. Yeah, that's for sure.
We've also never gotten off the tracks immediately at the beginning.
So this episode is our grand finale for this season, and it is about literary feuds. And we've each chosen one. Who wants to go first? Give us some background.
Sure, I will.
All right.
Although feud is such a funny word, because I feel like maybe feud implies like two people who hate each other going at it.
Or, dust up, like conflagration.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of what the sitch is. It's, it's a battleground.
just like love, right?
Just like love. And I think this was basically the first and only one that came to mind when the idea for this episode was floated. Because I think it was the one that I had the most personal, like I experienced it in real time, and I had the most personal connection to it. And it is the Sad Puppies debacle.
The Sad Puppies versus the Hugo Award.
Basically, it was a kind of reckoning within the establishment fantasy sci-fi community. The Hugo Awards is the kind of premier sci-fi fantasy award, kind of like the Oscars or I don't know, Tonys, Emmys, but for sci-fi fantasy fiction.
Less razzle-dazzle than the Tonys.
Less razzle-dazzle than the Tonys.
Only on some years, though. Other years, depends who wins.
I mean, apparently, like, it got quite debaucherous back in the 60s and 70s when, a lot of kind of, I don't want to say prolific, very important works were that we still kind of hear about today. I don't have a list of any of them with me here, but, like Asimov, etc. George R.R. Martin won his kind of first ones for, this is, 20 years before he wrote Game of Thrones.
And of course, friend of the podcast, John Crowley. He's won it before.
There we go. Thank you. Ursula K. Le Guin, another friend of the podcast. A bunch of very important seminal fantasists have won this award, particularly going back to those earlier years. Much like many awards, it has been criticized. I think around in the 2000s of decreasing relevance, but I think that that's not true at all, and that it, unlike one might say the Oscars, popularity and critical reception and commercial consumption have both still to this day been maintained within this award. With over the course of the award, though, there was basically a divide between people who wanted the award to become more critically relevant, and those who were kind of stands for like shitty, pulpy, lowbrow. And I use this term because that is how, one of our main characters uses it, working class fiction. And this culminated in 2013, two guys whose names are Brad Torgerson and Larry Correa, created a voting slate. I'm kind of explaining this out of order. The Hugos have a similar voting slate to the Academy Awards. So basically, to vote in it, all you have to do is become a member. Unlike the Oscars, it's very easy to become a member. You just pay the dues. Anyone, I could become a Hugo member. You, dear listener, could become a Hugo. A member of the WorldCon, which is the governing body that runs the Hugo Awards. So in the 2010s, blogging became a thing, particularly in the early 2010s, and like it was a big force. And Larry Correia and Brad Torgerson used their blogs to create a voting stack for their followers to vote. They believed, as they're kind of they're Midwest conservative, average Joe Americans. That's how they portray themselves, at least, and that's the kind of fantasy that they write. Women have their bodices ripped, and men use guns to kill other bad men who probably don't speak English, or human, as it were. It was quite successful the first year that they did this. There was a big backlash to this particular voting stack. The other thing about the Hugos is that it has been quite successfully politically diverse amongst its writers. It traditionally, very, very conservative writers have won, and very, very progressive writers have also won. And there's never been a big blow up.
It's like I'm pretty sure Heinlein won one, and so did Ursula K. Le Guin. So that's kind of like the opposite ends of the spectrum, right?
Absolutely. Funnily enough, in Australia, there are far more women writing fantasy. But in America, traditionally, men have won more awards. But women have been winning awards consistently over the years. So, compared to a lot of other kind of pillars of culture, it has been quite diverse. But the awards, as the awards kind of grew with the internet, the push was that, this is now a worldwide award. We should be awarding people from more diverse backgrounds than what we traditionally have, which Correia and Torgerson also took umbrage with. In their minds, this is a local award for local writers, and it should be done so. So their kind of slate was called Sad Puppies. They named it after that Sarah McLachlan ad, which I don't think we even had here in Australia. I don't even know if that's her name. But it's that American ad where she with an arms on the angels, that one. And apparently there are sad dogs, and I guess in their mind that's what they were. They were the sad puppies who needed help.
Yeah. So I don't know too much about it, but it was a sort of reaction. It was sort of, I guess, one of the first reactions in the 2010s to the whole woke culture, right? Like, absolutely. And then on the one side, you had like your people who spent too much time on Tumblr getting involved with the fan community, and then you had these other guys, and that's what they were reacting to.
I think because so this is just one side. I think the big narrative that has been pushed has been, because there's three parties here. Kind of Correia and Torgerson are your kind of average center right doofuses who were like, well, hang on a minute. I would have won this award 20 years ago. They probably wouldn't have. But I might have been able to win this award 20 years ago. Now I've got all these, people from who knows where, and this is not their time. Like, they're great. I think Torgerson was, heavily accused of being a racist fuck, and his big defense to that was, I've been married to an African-American woman. I have a black daughter. I've had her for 20 years, so fuck off. Take that as you will. I think that the kind of the idea of reactionary was intensely buffered by the fact that ebooks and online discourse had kind of reached its maximum level of cultural kind of importance, where people still talk like, oh, you have a blog, you have something to say that might be important. Whereas now you're like, oh, you have a blog, fuck off.
We call it Substack now, actually.
Of course.
It's much more regal and
Although it has sub in the name, so it's like, you know, how is that regal? Still seems kind of a bit cucky.
Well, I mean, name one person with a Substack who's not a cuck. I mean, this is we're all cucks in this.
Matt, tell us.
Yeah. Poor River. River has a Substack.
We love you.
We love you, River.
Love you. But he knows he's a cuck. That's all right. Yeah. He's a proud cuck.
Instead of twink revolutions, we should have cuck revolutions instead. That's
cuck counter revolution.
Anyway, they were reacting. Shonen and next main character that I would like to bring up. Although I think
this is a saga, isn't it?
It is a fucking saga. Only more progressive. I'm trying to keep this as short as possible.
No, I'm not saying. I'm just saying. I didn't know that it had so many parts.
It is. It's fucking wild. The things that happen. I'm not going to touch on all of them. Chuck Tingle was a main character during this, which is very funny. I'm using Seanan Maguire as a kind of focal point. Many like I think she got 5 nominations in 2012 or 2013. I think it's 2012. But her book did not sell very well. So their kind of initial slate in 2013 was almost a reaction. I'm guessing a reaction to that. She kind of, blogged her way into being a very important figure within the community, and then her political views very liberal, and she made that very abundantly clear. In the 2014 Hugo Awards, which I think is the year of the second Sad Puppy slate, it was meant to be hosted by Jonathan Ross, the comedian, the British comedian. She went on like a intense screed about a fatphobic comedy, a stand-up event that, escalated to, people, like attacking him. So he eventually just dropped out. That had the effect of, making the Sad Puppies even more like, and when I say Sad Puppies, I mean not just Correa and Torgerson, but the, intense kind of like blogging, Twitter, online kind of, blue collar working class conservatives. I'm using bunny ears for this. So this kind of back and forth ideological battle that these kind of two groups, one, the kind of establishment, elites, versus these, angry people who wanted bodice ripping. This is like where the final main character of the Sad Puppy Saga, Vox Day, kind of inserts himself. Vox Day is
this sounds like a villain from a bad science fiction movie from the 1970s.
He really isn't. Well, obviously Vox Day is not his real name. He decided to call himself the voice of God.
Thank fuck.
Because he's a character. He's like the son of a politician from the South America who moved to Europe. He returned to tradition because he felt his views were not being validated in his country of birth. So he and this is where where a lot of the kind of mainstream talk about this has kind of revolved. Particularly this was all happening with Vox Day, particularly in the year or two before Trump was elected. It's around the same time as Gamergate. He saw this kind of thing happening on. He has his own indie publisher called Castelia House that basically is a vanity print publishing him and other far-right figures. So he saw the Sad Puppies slate. He decided to create his own slate called Rabid Puppies, in which he, the Sad Puppy slate, it had a lot of conservative authors, but it also had a lot of progressive authors who they felt were making the art that they thought was appropriate. Vox Day was like, no, scorch the fucking earth. We're going to block stack this with the most heinous shit that we possibly can. Obviously, this made everyone else very angry. And also, a lot of the sad puppies loved this idea of, that their slates for the previous year had been successful, and this was, a kind of very charismatic. The charismatic in the terms of he had a band that called Psycho Kids. I've written it down wrong here. I think Psycho Cop, but like the C's had been turned into K's. He's that guy. He's the KKK guy, the unironic KKK guy. Although there's a bit of quibbling as to whether this is a persona he was putting on. It's a little bit of a Lady Gaga-esque performance artist.
Oh yes, I Lady Gaga, famous impersonator of the KKK.
Exactly.
That's a joke for legal reasons.
So due to the kind of injection of Vox Day into the kind of proceedings here, the kind of establishment voters, basically like you're consorting with this far right extremist, a man who he like directly advocated for white supremacy, eugenics, all the fun things that you can imagine.
He's a classic science fiction writer.
Yeah. Yeah, sure, why not? And basically shut them down. So in the Hugos there's a option for no nominee. You can nominate no one, and it will be an option for the vote, and then the final vote they could have no award. And I think in the 2015, I should have written the year. I think it's the 2015 and 2014 ballots. No award won more than, there's like 8 categories in the Hugos. I think 7 of 8 categories there was no award given because the rabid puppies were so successful in their vote stacking that a bunch that basically the establishment said, we won't have this, we won't have any part of this. The year after, the sad puppies imploded, of course, because you have your kind of center right who do not want to be overtaken by the far right. The far right inevitably turned towards infighting. They all fucking hate each other now. Vox Day is constantly still talked about, like on this podcast, and made a lot of money. So,
so at the end of the day,
Sigma grind set.
Yeah, at the end of the day, everyone won.
Yeah, I mean, the Hugos were quote unquote saved, because the establishment stayed. Nothing changed. The far right got a lot of money, which is what they probably wanted in the first place. And I don't know what Correa and Torgerson won, apart from a lot of abuse and.
You know what the moral of this story is, though?
Oh, I definitely know. Is that every proper literary feud ends up with the establishment winning and some guy getting a lot of money at the end of it because he's managed to piss off the right people.
Yeah. There's that, but there's also don't democratize literary awards.
Yeah.
I'm an old-fashioned elitist here, except the only problem. What?
We all are.
Yeah. The only problem with that, though, is that you have to make sure that the people who are judging the awards have actual taste.
Yeah, that's better said than done.
I mean, see, that's the funny thing, isn't it? It's like you can imagine in the 60s and 70s, to be a Worldcon member, you had to. I mean, I suppose you could have
to live in your parents' basement.
You would have been attending. You would have been attending a convention that
in your parents' basement, right? It's nothing changed. Sorry,
I'm not dignifying you with a response, Ruben. From your bloody inner northern box apartment. Fuck off.
Southern place. Please get it right.
Oh, I'm sorry. That's even worse. So that's even better. I just think it's very interesting the way that this only could have happened this century, basically, because in the 60s and 70s, 80s, you'd have to attend this convention, just like the Oscars. They would have the exclusivity of the membership. Excuse me, was very much dictated by the fact that you had physical limitations on your ability to exercise your right to vote. That no longer takes place, and so the kind of, I'm very sympathetic to Correa and Torgerson for seeing that like there's an issue with this. I think that they're probably fucking stupid, and from everything I've read about them, they seem kind of dumb. But I'm very sympathetic to their goals and like trying to change something that they perceived as stacked towards, elitist kind of opinions and feelings. I think that they're wrong that it is elitist. I think that there's an elitist element there, but I think ultimately the kind of diversity of the Hugos has been a massive boon for it. And I think it's not just financially, but also critically. I think that good stuff has been started to come out from it again. Because it was in a lull for 10 years or so.
I think that's one of those things that is similar to Gamergate, which you said happened around the same time, is that it got all this reputation for being like this terrible thing, but like there's like a kernel or a core element that I'm like, yeah, I kind of agree with that. Like where if you, and we've talked about this many times before on this podcast, but if you're privileging capital D diversity over everything else, that is not like, that's, you don't want to like award points for that. Yeah. If you want it to be good as well, like just because it's got like every character is a trans sex worker, like,
and it's the same way that, like so often in like political society, multiculturalism will get held up as a like voting block by like politicians or whatever. And it's just like, similar sort of thing here where it can be co-opted by people who just want to use it for like nefarious ends or non-nefarious ends. Whereas like anytime, particularly an Australian politician, but I imagine like most Western politicians, at least in English-speaking countries, do the same thing. Anytime, you see Scott Morrison or Dan Andrews or whoever discussing the benefits of the wonders of diversity, multiculturalism, it's always at like a restaurant or at some food van or whatever. It's never like anything that actually, I mean, food's great, right? But it's like, it's the only thing that ever gets mentioned. And it's like, okay, we can have like proper diversity if you want, but like, what about cultural diversity? In a sense that, there are many different like cultures who have many different ideas to contribute to literary culture and stuff like that. That can be like rich and complex. That can't just be reduced to the fact that, oh, look at me, I'm from X, Y, or Z country. I can cook really mean curry. Morrison's delightful Facebook posts about him learning how to make curries for Jen and the girls. That's the state of diversity in this country. Is our wonderful prime minister making a mean beef muscle?
Yeah, which is similar to the point that I guess the sad puppies were making, is that like it's symbolism, not really like. And some people might say that we need the symbolism to, I don't know, encourage future generations of capital D diverse writers and stuff. But it's like, do you want to encourage like a kind of, that the whole idea of soft bigotry of low expectations sort of thing? Like the literary award and the prime literary award in its particular genre is being like, we're awarding this based on these kind of intersectional metrics rather than its literariness. And I guess that I'm not sure, like, because I'm not as familiar with it as you are, Rio, but I'm not sure if that was their initial point, that it's like, is this about rectifying some imbalance, or is it actually about literary merit? And if nothing else, that what they did is bringing that question to the forefront, I guess.
I mean, well, I don't know. I mean, they're Like if you read the bio on Torgerson's website, it says like, or it did at the time. I hate people who hate veterans. I love military sci-fi. I think people should write purely for the enjoyment of their readers, not for literary kudos. And that all these people writing literature are writing boring shit, and it shouldn't be invading upon sci-fi. I think that it was very much co-opted by other people to mean kind of what you think, like what you said. And there were obviously lots and lots of discussions had around the idea of diversity versus literary merit. And, the whole gamut of kind of opinions from, well, I don't really care if we lose a little bit of literary merit, if it means that more people are able to have their kind of voice and art heard, versus no, we must maintain a purity of merit, and the best quote unquote book must win at the loss of celebrating people from diverse backgrounds. And I mean, ultimately, I kind of thought I feel about it that it was all moot, ultimately, because no one really seemed to learn anything from the whole thing, apart from we all learned that you can make a lot of money by being an absolute cunt.
Oh no, well, like all of the best sort of dust ups like this that we're talking about, and I'm guessing every example that we're bringing up today, no one learns anything. That's the best. No. The best ones are when no one actually learns anything.
No,
but at the end of the day, Rio's right. The beauty of everything is that some cunt's going to make some money. And isn't that what it's all about? I mean, free market all the way, baby.
I mean, I just
in praise of the people who swoop in and make a quick buck. The hucksters proper.
It's like what you said, Matt. It's like the democracy of these awards. It really calls it into question. Like, if this is literally all just because this started because two camps of bloggers were whipping up people so that they could win an award so that they would make more sales for their books. So this is a very basically explicitly what this fight was about. And they all sold far more copies of their books because of the entire debacle. So it's not just Vox Day who won. Larry Correia, Sean Maguire, Brad Torgerson, they all won because they all were having their names shouted endlessly for over 2 years to people who bought, artificially inflated their kind of chances by buying their books and making sure their names were everywhere. And it's very hard. Like I said, this did become a mainstream kind of topic because of its almost prescient kind of prelude to the 2016 election. It's very, very similar in terms of parties winning here. I don't know if I would call Trump a far-right person, just an opportunity huckster who, unlike Vox Day, actually became a president. I mean, I will say I do miss Melania. I mean, if I'm going to wrap this up, I wish that this had a Melania Trump, this story. It doesn't, unfortunately. I don't know if Vox Day could ever have sex with anyone, but
maybe there'll be some epilogue one day involving Melania in some way.
No, thank you.
Or at least like a weeb version of Melania. It's like some sort of anime version that's been recreated in real life, like a 3D printer that's stuck in the guy's mum's basement or something.
A waifu.
Yeah, proper waifu.
It needs to be Italian anime though. He lives in Italy.
we can do Italy. That's fine. One of Silvio Berlusconi's bunga anime girls. Anyway, so we'll move on to mine.
What's yours, Ruben?
Well, I've got two. One I'll do quickly at the end because it's more of a funny non-feud, an imaginary feud, which the best ones truly are. Okay, so my controversy is an Australian one. So the best ones are always Australian because they're always the most pathetic.
Australia's not real, Ruben.
Australia's not real. It's a made-up country, and feuds are made up again to service the outrage machine on Twitter.
Thank you.
And to allow people to write response articles to make a quick buck, like any good feud is. And this one, you could have picked like any number of them. I mean, the most obvious is the Ern Malley controversy, which kind of like a feud that started with the James McCauley and what's the other guy's name? Max Harris. Was he the other guy? I forget. I should know this. I should know this better than I do.
Yeah, we should all know this, but we don't.
Yeah. Where they created like a fake modernist poet, and they managed to get published stuff about. Very, very famous thing that I'm sure all our listeners will already know lots about, being good Australian citizens. The one I've chosen today though is began, and again, this is again the kind of feud that just like people have probably forgotten that it even happened because it just happened in like 10 seconds, and then people spat out their shit and then forgot about it. But this started in, I want to say 2016, I think this was, when Luke Carman, wonderful Australian essayist from Western Sydney, published in Meanjin a essay with the best title imaginable, Getting Square in a Circle Jerk. Sorry, Getting Square in a Jerking Circle.
Luke Carman versus the Australian literary establishment.
And in this essay, he just takes to complete task mainly like one type of anti-artist in the Australian literary scene. The he divides it into like two kinds of people. So there are those who sort of like play out their like fantasies of literary writing, and they're sort of like psychic overdeterminations of traumas and all these different kinds of things, just by being writers themselves. Then there are the opportunists, the true dreamers in the great Australian tradition, who all they really care about is their great dream, he writes, is to be welcomed into the bright and glimmering constellation of the arts industry. Proper, like become a proper administrator. So I'm just going to read like a few things because there are so many. Carmen is such a brilliant rhetorician that you just have to sort of read lots of things that he writes. And I've got the rhetoric of this essay is half the point. Like it's supposed to be like apocalyptic and over the top, which no one got. No one realized that, like, how ironic he is. And we can have like a bunch of lists of different essays, responses. There's a good one by Emmett Stinson. It sort of highlights a lot of these things. Anyway, it's one of my favorite lines from this, talking about the kind of the writers who are one half of the like Australian setup, who because they have no talent elsewhere, will become writers who never get published. So he writes, reality TV shows like Australian Idol, X Factor, The Voice, and so on have taught a generation of Australians that to be involved with music requires being humiliated and exposed for any delusions of talent they might have. Acting, likewise, is off limits to the ugly and uncharismatic, so there are no chances there. The plastic arts require a modicum of ingenuity, the learning of a new and obtuse language, and an absurd level of tenacity before one can even begin to bluff one's way into its clubhouse, all far too taxing. The writing world, as Henry James tells us, is a house of not one, but a million windows. Out of each pane stares a deranged shut-in whose fantasy novel is about a dystopian post-apocalyptic planet enslaved by telekinetic tutararas, is a mere decade from being self-published online, or a poet who's just returned from summer in Berlin and is feverishly devising centos derived from official UN reports on Australia's asylum seeker policies to be printed in the form of origami birds. So you can imagine he pissed off a few people just saying that. Of course, he also says, like right here, that he is, I am after all, I am one myself after all, and will likely still be one when I'm laid in the dirt. Then there are other ones, the people who's really aiming at the sort of these arts industry types, the administrators, the pseudo-politicians who want nothing but power to give out grant money to their friends and all those different kinds of things. And they really, the way he describes them is sort of perfect in the way they have this sort of progressive revolutionary zeal and want to give themselves far too much credence than they actually have. So he writes, writers in the minds of these change makers are block-headed toddlers playing in the sandbox of culture. The arts dreamer has larger games in their sight. So this is who the arts dreamer is, the cultural industry person. Rather than fiddling about with the ephemera of fiction, because that would be obviously boring, they are busily revising cultural institutions. Rather than piddle with obsolete publishing fancies like novels and the like, they are pulling the strings in funding decisions. Forget revolutions of thought and consciousness. These visionaries are drawing together the next generation of writers from the dust of our collective cultural vacuum. And
God damn.
I mean, another part of the essay is very much taking to task the Ponzi scheme of creative writing programs, where teachers delude students into believing that you can very easily get published one day if you just produce a really good HD essay, forgetting, of course, the fact that they themselves have recently published their own PhD, which was basically just like some sort of like auto-fictional tale about their time in I don't know, wherever in the jungle or something. And it becomes like a feedback loop. You get a PhD in creative writing, so you get people to read your work, but then you can never get published, so you then so on and so forth. Because they're really popular, they remain like the last vestige of literary studies in Australia. And he eventually just like calls them out.
On that, I'd just like to mention, like, I remember taking a creative writing class like in my undergrad, and it was so funny because I was quite young too, but at this point I had more publications than the teacher.
Wow.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Wow.
Yeah.
Like the teacher had like one publication, and I'd already because I started publishing when I was like 18. I had like I had like 5 publications, and I was just like, this is a bit weird. But they had a PhD in creative writing, you see. So
well, that matters. It matters a lot more than publication. Doctorate, indeed. Yeah, so he kind of just calls them out, like, just be very specific. And here I might as well just drop all pretense. The social climbers of the arts, dragging their legions of Twitter followers behind them like some chain-linked serpent's tail, are not merely ambitious art workers. They are anti-artists in human form. They're incorrigible frauds and fakes, and so on. And before I go into like some of the response to this, there are two kinds. Like the way he describes these anti-artists and Melbourne mobsters, usually, is their style of the way they can denigrate someone. So if someone calls them out, and this particular person who was sort of calling out the Melbourne voice and the city of literature, which of course itself is like just banal branding, was like John O'Revanche, which I'm probably butchering that last name. And he writes this sort of piece confronting the sort of Melbourne voice in the way that it locks out other kinds of writing idea. Of course, the idea that a Melbourne voice even exists is itself not true, more of a fiction or a fantasy. But Carbon writes, but since it played directly on the vanity of these anti-artists, they were quick to laud Revanche's article as a, quote, important and necessary provocation, the usual descriptor that click lords use to describe any opinion piece with which they agreed. Or another example, they can call something a think piece, or that they try to puff up people who criticize them just to give their to make them look like as though they're properly engaging, properly accepting of different opinions, because usually the
controlled opposition.
Yes. And what really they more often than not, they just want to sort of control the debate. They want to control the way things get set. And of course, like, part of the point of Carmen's essay as well is that his apocalyptic rhetoric inflates their opinions, inflates their influence much more than they actually have, in part because he's trying to be provocative. He's trying to lure them into his trap, where they will then respond to him and create a feud.
Boy, did they.
Create a feud and create a controversy out of nothing. And like, even before, he's courted disaster many times. Wonderful Luke. but he does point out something like really important near the end of the essay, particularly around like the language of the way that someone like him can get denigrated, and people who have slightly more. I mean, Carmen's not particularly elitist upper class. Like he's very much like an inner city Western, not inner city, like a Western sort of writer, Western Sydney writer, who very much champions like the diversity of Western Sydney. And of the different voices coming out of there from multiple different racial, religious backgrounds and different class backgrounds as well. So this is not someone who's he plays up the fact that he's an insider, but the fact that someone like him can be an insider is sort of like half the joke, because it's just anyone can be an insider in Australian literature if you just know how to suck enough cock. But he can get sort of like denigrated as being like masturbatory, and this trope of masturbation is particularly important. In the way that they want to anything that gets that is too attacking of the middle class or the middle brow or whatever will get accused of being wankery because it's not being socially productive. It's not being you're just in this for the sake of pleasure, in this for the sake of playing games or whatever.
It's not contributing to the conversation.
It's not contributing to the conversation. It's not contributing to the march of progress or the march of culture or industry. The important thing is that the cultural people, these like sort of arts industries people, they themselves don't necessarily believe that writing can progress society anyway. But they believe that if they were in power, if they have control, they could be the vast mediators in this great push. And of course, like what they don't really understand is that art itself is kind of has no place in. I mean, no one reads, no one actually gives a shit about any of this anyway. Like if writing a book in any context is wankery in a society, and thank God it is. So any narcissist, the true narcissists are those who believe that they can actually affect change through literary and through reading. The actual narcissists like us, understand it better. With true narcissists.
Thank you for stating that, Ruben.
That's okay. So he writes, art, as the literary critic Terry Eagleton puts it, exists purely for its own self-delight. Very funny that he uses Eagleton there, because like that's like a very un-Eagleton-like statement. So the Marxist Eagleton basically being probably the descriptor there, and he's kind of being ironic, I imagine. So the anti-artists do their best to suppress this idea that literature exists for its own self-delight. In order to justify their own positions on committees and in community groups, and as festival directors, they need to create a powerful misconception that someone other than the artist is required to coordinate the manifest destiny of progress's perpetual march towards utopia through the alchemy of culture and industry. They need to believe in themselves that they have power in a culture or in particularly a sphere of culture that has no power at all. People, of course, did not respond favorably to this essay. I wonder why. If you get called a cunt, in an ironic sense as well. Like I think he holds them in contempt. But he holds them in contempt because they don't realize that most of this is just game playing, is like luring them in. The fact that they have an inflated sense of self-importance. I mean, he uses the language of Holden Caulfield as well to call them phonies. Which is also like quite ironic, because I think Carmen's more than willing to understand that, Holden Caulfield's language in The Catcher in the Rye is adolescent, is not some sort of mature voice or anything like that. Carmen's more than willing to get into the sand pit and start throwing sand. And if you throw sand back at him, he's just going to delight in it because, you pull the pig down into the mud and they look even more like a pig than they already were. So they were like Pete, and like Emmett's essay on this in Overland is quite good, as most of Emmett's essays are. He highlights things that everyone just started on Twitter, authors and reviewers I respect were calling it a, quote, waffly, cowardly piece of shit and a pretty small-minded way of thinking about art. There were critical responses to it, one by Jessica Friedman, one by Elena Savage, and one by Ben Eltham. The Friedman and the Savage articles don't exist anymore. You can't read them. The Eltham one you can find on The Guardian. But as Emmett points out, none of them actually, they kind of confess that they didn't really understand what Cumberland was trying to do in the first place. And as Emmett writes, like, regardless, those who want to lambaste the piece for its obtuseness seem unaware of the double bind such a charge creates. If you couldn't understand it, then it doesn't make any sense to be angry about it. And if you are angry about it, it probably wasn't that obtuse.
That's true. That whole article though was like, the Mad Max meme. That's bait. That's what that article is. Yeah.
And it's the reason I picked it is one, because it's just I love Carmen's essay writing in his style. I think he's exceptionally brilliant. And if you read so you can read it either on Meanjin, or I think the better place to read it is in his essay collection, Intimate Antipathies.
Which is an excellent collection.
It's one of the best essay collections written in this country, and probably anywhere really, for a while. And one of the reasons why it's excellent is because you can see his mind shaping and changing across the collection. So like by the end of the collection, and of course, like he's a lot of the time, the Luke Carmen narrator is itself a sort of projected persona that fits different contexts and stuff. But you can see him sort of going from this very apocalyptic, very vitriolic rhetoric in this essay to much more somber pieces about like fatherhood and marriage and relationships by the end of it, and like masculinity and stuff. And it becomes like much more poignant by the end of it. And watching that change come across is, I like both Carmen's, but I do particularly love the vitriolic Carmen probably a lot better. The other reason I picked it is because it's such a perfect encapsulation of like any literary feud that just exists because some beautiful cunt just wanted to like throw some mud at a pile, and everyone was like, oh my God, they threw mud at my beautiful clean windows, rather than just, putting a finger up at them and like ignoring them. I'm going to throw mud back at them, but I'm going to like, properly throw mud back at them. Everyone gets in a mud pile, and that's what this country is. It's a beautiful mess. So long as you don't get caught in the crossfire, you can just enjoy it on Twitter. Maybe poke some holes.
I mean, the funny thing of that it's Australian, and even if you're caught in the crossfire, it doesn't really matter. You can
yes
get the garden hose yourself off. It's not that bad.
And also, the best thing about this is that, like you said, the stakes are so low, and it's like no one, like, probably I would say over 90. Probably not like 99% of Australians wouldn't even know this whole thing happened.
No,
and it was
and even the 1% of Australians who do know it's happened, I'd say like 95% of them have forgotten about it. And forgot about it happening within like 2 or 3 weeks. They were like, oh my God, they might see like a retweet of it, something like, some guy like stumbles across it like 2 months later. It's like, what the fuck was all this? Like, what happened here? It's like, some guy just decided to piss off the middle brow. And is there anything better than pissing off the middle brow? Is there anything more middle brow than getting pissed off by some guy calling you a cunt? Like, it's perfect. It's just, we're the country of larrikins that don't understand how to be a larrikin. It's perfect. I love every bit of this country.
That element of kind of like self-irony that Carmen has is very encapsulates a certain Australian mode of like, nothing that I'm saying is matters. So if you're getting angry at me, then think about what you're actually getting angry at.
A beautiful Bogan Flinner, I think Twitter calls him. Okay. And as a sort of counter to this, I do have like another thing which is much more also beautifully Australian, but in a very idiosyncratic way. So another obviously good friend of the podcast, Gerald Murnane, he's very much not the kind of writer who gets into feuds. He's very much the opposite of an interactive writer, very much almost not a recluse at all, really. But he has that sort of imagery about him, sort of an aloof figure, often the regional Victorian town of Goroke, in his country house. But it's not even really a country house, I don't think. I'm pretty sure it's just some outdoor.
He tends the pub at the golf course, doesn't he?
Yeah. So he's not like, he doesn't like the sort of parochialism of anything.
Yeah, he's definitely not interested in like literary communities or anything.
He's not interested in like political things. Like he just doesn't care. Like all he cares about is his own writing and trying to do that.
Yeah.
And Carmen actually in the essay he starts off by outlining the more classically Jamesian writer who very much wants to, craft beautiful sentences and really cares about their art versus the other kind of artist who their art is like a reflection of their own sort of internal psychic dramas and their own repressed traumas and everything like that. And that the majority of Australian writers, like 95%, are just repressed trauma. And you get the few people like Murnane. He doesn't say Murnane's name, but I'm pretty sure he means Murnane at one point there because I know he's written on Murnane a few times, particularly in that book of essays. Anyway, so one of the things Murnane does do, though, which poor Shannon Burns is probably getting lost in these archives at the moment, is he archives relentlessly, and there's like hundreds of thousands of pages of writings that he's put in his archive, both that are like drafts of things, but things that he's specifically written for his archive, just like thousands of page journals and stuff, lots of just weird jokes and stuff. But the magazine Music and Literature did a feature on Murnane back in 2013, and on the website they published photocopies of the index of like 3 of his archives, and this is like archive 21 to 24. So this is only like a glimpse of what is there, and you only get the titles. And the reason I love this thing so much is you just get the titles. You have to like imagine what's behind it, and he's such a cock tease that or as he said in the most un-Murnanian sentence anyone's ever written. He got asked by the White Review, just like an online magazine. Actually, I think they have it there in print too. He's like best books of 2021. The first sentence is very, very un-Murnanian. I'm the daddy of eccentric writing. giving all of us Murnane fans even more Freudian problems than we already had. And anyway, so some of these, I'm just going to read out like some of these, some of the titles, and we can, hope that there's something good here. So one of them is My Racist Letter to Robert Kenning. Telling white lies to the literature board. I took part in a public farce. I behaved badly at the Adelaide Festival, which I do know the story behind that, and that would be like a fun literary controversy. He, I feel like I might be misremembering this because someone told me that I couldn't find the source behind it. If I read it or just someone told me, but I'm pretty sure he never like leaves the state. He's never been on a plane. He went to Tasmania once and it was a disaster. The biggest disaster he had was going to Adelaide for this festival, I imagine is what he's referring to. And he thought that he was going to win the prize for some reason. I don't know why he thought like he only get invited if he was going to win. So he rocks up there. He like gets the bus to Adelaide or something. Spends like a disastrous time. He's no sleep. He gets really drunk at the festival when he realizes he's not going to win. And Helen Garner takes it from him instead. And Garner is like, for people who don't know, Garner or Murnane is like the antithesis of a Murnane type writer. Yeah, and I'm pretty sure ever since then he's like refused to. He doesn't really go to festivals unless he knows he's going to be
lauded.
And then there's I foolishly sued Barry Dickens. I tell a celebrated author that she's unreadable. 2 women bother me. 10,000 anagrams of Gerald Murnane. Hoaxes, how I love them. Deakin University was run by lunatics. Bawdy limericks. I gave a literary prize to a bush pig. Thomas Keneally, a plagiarist found out. Where are we? My girlfriend Anne Summers. That's a very Australian thing that no one's going to get. I win the Patrick White thing. A letter about my bowel movements et al. About music farting et al. I just want to know everything like behind this, and I imagine like poor Shannon's like going to get buried in this archive. I read I rebuff Helen Garner with much force.
Wow, I want them to have a feud, like a proper
I
feud.
want
right.
I want all of these things to be made public before he dies, and just everything gets like sprinkled anonymously in like Australian like literary journals. Like I want all this. I want this spice.
Go to more events that he won't win things, so he can have fights for us.
Yeah, like imagine what he should do. You know, he wins the Nobel Prize finally, and he just leaks everything like a big wiki dump, and gets cancelled for like 10 different reasons. Jared wins his first fuck.
Jesus Christ, Gerald. Calm down. Calm down.
Masturbation. Female masturbation. My brother's obsession. Darkies.
Oh no.
Oh
no.
My brother was a fool. I wonder why. I'm a vengeful bastard. I take a funny turn.
I can't imagine like
my mother and I
documenting everything.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's just
I can't
and I don't know how much like there's stuff like behind this or not. Like he could just be trolling us all, which would be a very like Minane. Like people don't really understand like Minane's like actually very funny, and like no one gets his humor, and you can see like the kind of humor that would exist like by just reading this archive. Should I tell literature, capital L literature, by the way, should I tell literature to get fucked? Peter Carey exposed at last. And the final one that he has there is I'm a very strange fellow. And then there's like another thing with like he like sort of details it much more. You know, a typescript of more than 70,000 words reporting in detail the experience of Gerald Minane from 1951 to 1958 when he was aged 12 to 19. Like there's endless material in this archive that apparently he's going to sell it after he's deaf and like, you know, use it for something. But he won't use it for anything, but they'll use it for something after he's deaf. And I just...
So what's the controversy with this one? Or is it just that like it's going to start some feuds maybe?
It's going to start a feud. It's like and I don't know how much of these are imagined feuds. Like, does he know anything about Jared wins his first fuck? It doesn't matter that his brother doesn't like darkies. Like, I don't know. So much like non-controversy that I...
Not the D word.
Beautiful.
Yeah, and this is... I feel like Minane's the perfect person to imagine controversies about himself, and is properly, even though he like secludes himself, is properly full of spite that all these people like Thomas Keneally and Peter Carey and Garner and whatever can't write sentences, whereas he can write sentences. And he's played like... So a guy sent me this letter of his that he sent to Imre Selzinski, who used to be a literary critic and academic who wrote a book on Minane in the 80s, and who also recently used to be Mike Baird's spin doctor. So, you know, there's hope for us all. Mike Baird's a former Conservative Premier of New South Wales, for people who don't know. Proper Malcolm Tucker kind of vibe, imagine. But he got pissed off that Imre had like done something. It just, I don't know, played a practical joke on him. So he sent this old magazine, Scripsy, which is based at the University of Melbourne, he wanted to like send Imre a fake letter by one of his students complaining to him, and like wrote up this like letter by this like female student, got Scripsy to send it to him, and like Imre just knew immediately that it was Minane because Minane writes in a very distinctive style and didn't try to mask it whatsoever. Anyway, so these are the feuds to come in the Gerald Minane archive when we finally learn about his bawdy limericks, and that, you know, just like Philip Roth, he was actually a dirty pervert. That could have also been a fun controversy to talk about, the Philip Roth stuff from this year. But anyway, on to better and more beautiful things with.
Well, yes, we're leaving Australia, going back to America for one of my favorite feuds, which is the one between literary luminaries Norman Mailer and Gore Vidal.
Gore Vidal versus Norman Mailer.
What I love about this one is that it's kind of like a kind of MCU movie, because there are like there are like other characters involved as well that give context to the feud. So basically,
very universe.
Yeah, basically it comes to a head on the Dick Cavett show, which you can look up on YouTube. You can see the whole interaction. And apparently, so Gore Vidal and Norman Mailer are on this show. It's also the Norman Mailer quote that I've used in the theme song comes from this encounter. It's basically Norman Mailer insulting Gore Vidal. So what happened on this show was it was really kind of got a bit heated, and they kind of are exchanging barbs. Prior to them coming on this show, Norman Mailer had actually headbutted Gore Vidal before they went out on stage.
What the fuck?
Yeah, because this was at the point in Norman Mailer's career where he had sort of it's really weird because it sort of fashioned himself as the kind of new Hemingway. Like he'd always get like drunk and like be like a macho man and shit like that.
In the same way that Hemingway was, like, they were both actually very effeminate men.
Yes.
In this very like contradictory way. Like the masculine persona was like, probably masking something. That's
a point I've raised elsewhere, is that, being like ultra masculine is being easily masculine. You know what I mean? Like you don't give too much of a crap about it. Like overly performing it is it's camp. And therefore effeminate. But anyway. Of
course, Vidal himself is, the king of this kind of 1970s debonair camp style that just pisses Mailer off because it probably like reveals something about himself.
Exactly. So, and the context for this before they kind of butt heads, literally, on the Dick Cavett show was that Gore Vidal had written a review of The Prisoner of Sex, which was an essay that Norman Mailer had written in response to the women's liberation movement. So this was in the early 70s. And good old Mailer had some very complicated thoughts about women's lib and wrote about them in this book. And one of the things that's interesting about it as well is that there was a film made around this time called Town Bloody Hall, which is really great. It's basically Norman Mailer goes to sort of like a town hall kind of meeting with a bunch of feminists, including Germaine Greer. I forget who the other ones are. What was this? Susanna someone? I forget that.
What's that?
Feminist. Anyway, a whole heap of feminists. Germaine obviously steals the show because she's great. She's at the height of her powers in the 70s. There's also like Susan Sontag and like people are in the audience asking questions. But there's a really good documentary. But it's the context for this as well, because it's Norman Mailer, the singular man, and a bunch of these feminists. And he's mansplaining his position about it and everything. So obviously he kind of caused a bit of a fuss about his opinions about women's lib. Gore Vidal responded to this in the New York Review of Books and kind of wrote a sort of savage essay about it, or a review of it. Norman Mailer took this very personally.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas and you see if you watch the clip from the Dick Cavett show, Gore Vidal is very clear that he's not doing it personally. Like he's not personally insulting kind of Norman Mailer. He's like, I think you're a great writer. You're very talented. And he was just talking about this book, but that didn't get through to him. And Norman Mailer's like making all these kind of accusations about Gore Vidal being like an intellectual pollutant and and then he takes over the show and has this big fight with Gore Vidal. But what I like about it is, like I said, it is like there's other kind of stories going on with there's that town hall thing in response to this book that he's written. Then Gore Vidal gets involved, and then they come on the show, and it's just perfect. It's a perfect encapsulation of one of the reasons it's good as well is that there are two massive egos involved here, of a different sort, but no less capacious. And And it's just really great. And it's great that it happened on a talk show as well, which you would never get anymore. You would never get like two articulate writers arguing with each other and trading like witty quips. And it's just, yeah, it's very beautiful. It's my inspiration.
Q&A, right? I reckon, we need to start like our own, like, we'll take over Q&A on ABC, and then we'll just turn it into a revitalized Dick Cavett show. And we'll just get we'll get Luke Carmen on there. We'll get whoever else. And because most of them are going to be chicken shit, they won't say anything at all because they don't want to revel or anything. We'll get Clementine Ford on there. It'll be fine.
Well, that will be something to watch.
Oh yes, Rapier.
I do love this one because it's like the fact that it's on a talk show and Mailer and Vidal are actually like quite influential personalities and writers. The way there's contrasts to these more contemporary feuds. I mean, maybe not the one that Rhea brought up, which has like at least had much more of a sort of a mainstream impact. But like the Australian ones that I brought up, like it's a perfect encapsulation of like just how pathetic the Australian feuds are. Like apart from the Ern Malley one, which is like which was massive and is like still like a huge thing. Any like controversy in Australia, no one remembers them. Like apart from Ern Malley, there are no like literary controversies in Australia at all. Like I can't think of any off the top of my head. And this is like my research area. Like I know this stuff. There's nothing is particularly memorable. Everything falls by the wayside. But you do get these ones like the Mailer Vidal one, which stick in the memory and linger in the consciousness of things. Because at least during that time, writing for a very brief moment managed to still matter for a little bit. Even if the reason why it really mattered was because of its visualization as well. And whereas like a lot of maybe this is like another thing about Australian literary feuds is that they're all in print because no one gives a shit about like televisual literature or depictions of literature unless it's the fucking ABC book club or whatever crap like that.
Speaking middlebrow.
Yeah, speaking of middlebrow. I would love I'm pretty sure actually no, Christopher Hitchens was on the book club.
Yes.
Is that's something what his pink salmon suit or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah, but we don't have anything like that. It's kind of like disappointing. Doesn't surprise me, but yeah.
Well, I mean, the US doesn't have anything like that either, so it's not.
Yeah, there is nothing in the US like that anymore. Just
like I actually went back after I discovered that clip many years ago. Like watched some other episodes of that show, and like it's so different to the way that like talk shows exist now. Like it was because it's on TV, it's got that whole, this is for everyone sort of vibe, but also like they were discussing things that were really highly intellectual, but like not talking down to
degrade you at all.
Yeah, not talking down to people or anything like that. And it was funny and like, where is this? Return.
I mean, they were able to kind of plug that gap between we're advertising my book and I can do whatever the hell I want on my TV show. It's the Dick Cavett show. It's not, late night with Dick Cavett.
Yes.
I don't know, man. I mean, we've still got Bill Maher. There's still Jimmy Fallon, probably. There are these crusaders of intellectual thought on television in America.
I'm not sure if I'd call Bill Maher a crusader.
Well, I mean, he's going to get strung up at some point and put up by who I don't know. Bill Maher, Jesus. Was this before or after the Vidal Buckley feud as well?
Oh, this would have been after because.
It was like 67 or something.
Yeah, this was 71. So this is early 70s. That's another. There's a documentary about that as well.
Crypto fascist. Don't call me a crypto fascist, you Nazi. I'll rock you, run right in the socket or whatever.
Yeah.
But is there? It makes me wonder if, like today's literary landscape can actually produce such egotistical narcissists to give us this glorious content either, because no one's egos are validated anymore because everything is so individualized and every career exists in a much smaller microcosm. Even like the biggest celebrities of today, or the biggest celebrities of 20 years ago, like Angelina Jolie and Brad Pitt, they can't like make a hit movie anymore. no one can make a hit movie anymore. Like we've gone back to, movies wise, we've gone back to the studio system basically, or
That's
like ego is not rewarded as much as it was anymore.
Yeah, that's a good point. But it's also not just about ego. It's also about rocking the boat.
Mm-hmm.
Like there was and there's all sorts of reasons for this, but there was the consequences for being an outspoken person, or like offering your thoughts in a very declarative way, were not the same back then as they are now. Which is why you have a sort of conformity and a consensus of like what you're supposed to believe and what you're supposed to say, especially in literary culture. So writers and stuff, like no one really says anything controversial. It's always like a controversy is implied rather than overly stated, with some exceptions, I guess, like J.K. Rowling, for instance. But even that is like, I think people blow up what she's actually said into something that it's not. But anyway, that's a whole other thing.
The most controversy today occur because they need controversy. Things will get exploded out of the proportions. Things, to feed the outrage machine, and so forth. So like things have to be, because the what do you call it? The algorithm or the system needs the outrage to, continue on, but people themselves are trying to be less and less outrageous. So you have to find pockets of outrage and things and like explode. The person who has like 2 Twitter followers, whatever, find him and explode him out. Or the Australian writer who no one gives a shit about, explode him out because of something he said because he might win a prize one day.
Yeah, but the cost is like fairly large if you're like a writer as well, because it's like your publisher will not have your back. If you say something that's considered controversial, they will dump you. So that's why no one says anything.
Particularly in Australia, where like because the gains are so low, in some instances, in poetry, weirdly enough, because like the gains are really low, no one gives a shit. And like a lot of like really, you can still get like a lot of experimental sort of shit in poetry because no one cares at all. If you're going to publish, the difference between publishing an experimental work of poetry and a non-experimental work is like two book sales. Whereas in, a novel or whatever, it could be like, 500 book sales, which is not much at all, but it still could be like, they care about that. And I think there are still egos. But it's like what Carmen says, he's going to say, the egos are sublimated within bureaucratic systems.
Definitely.
Where they are power hungry, but they're power hungry behind the scenes. They're power hungry behind their anonymous Twitter profiles. And they feed off that sort of narcissistic rage. But they themselves are too chicken shit to ever appear on like a Dick Cavett show, and show themselves, because they don't want to, so long as they're behind a grant application, they have more power, they have more satisfaction. I think that's one of the things that the internet's probably done compared to the kind of visual culture or televisual culture of the 1970s, where things were much more, you could be, your words could be attributed to your voice in a much more distinct way, whereas the anonymization of the internet and just the greater sort of influence of bureaucratic forms allow you to have more of an anonymized voice, and the people with the biggest egos are the people with the smallest dicks. And they use that dicker, to stick in the wedge of the bureaucratic crank.
Yeah, people do just like keep their head down and don't rock the boat. Like it's very much I can't tell you how many times and I don't say controversial things, but sometimes if I say something,
no, never.
I just say what I think.
Controversy, never.
Yeah, I just say what I think, and then people are like, "Oh yeah, I would never say this publicly," but I get heaps of messages like that, and it's just like,
this is
just say it.
Even if it's like, the things you say, or like most of us will say, it's like, okay, this isn't controversial.
Yeah.
Like, and so much, it's like so many things that do get like mistaken for being controversy now. It's like, it's banal. Like, we're just having a conversation about things. Like, I don't,
Yeah. Yeah, but more and more, I think like you should say what you want to say in your work. Yeah, and just do it that way because there's sort of ambiguity there, and also people can. But then again, like people need like you to literally say what you want to say as well. Like so, there's that double bind. But anyway,
say what you want to say, like in writing, and not on Twitter, probably.
Yes,
not on a podcast.
Yeah, we never say what we want to say here.
Oh no, I'm actually not like a libertarian. I'm much more of a Marxist.
Yeah. We never say like.
I picked that up.
Yeah, we're always when we stop recording, we're just saying like heaps of slurs and stuff. Well, actually, Rio actually does it while we're recording.
Exactly. See, I'm the true non-censor here. Censor myself. What's that mean?
The pure id. You see, it's the dynamics of the podcast that make everything go around.
I love to slur.
All right, are we done?
Yeah, we're done.
I think we're done, and I think we're done for the year. Yay!
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas, everyone.
Happy holidays.
Happy Hanukkah.
We don't do that in Australia. We don't say happy holidays.
I'm pretty sure I'm in Australia, Matt. So suck my left nut. This is a feud. Bye. I'm going to be writing an essay on this to mail to your publisher about why you should be dropped.
I bought no gift this year, and I slept with your sister. I know I should have thought twice before I kissed her, but with the year we had last and the dress that she wore, I just went along for the ride, and I came back for more. And I'm sorry, baby.
That's all okay, honey, 'cause see, I bought no tree this year, and I slept with your brother. I read your daddy's car and went down on your mother. I set your record collection on fire and said I never knew. Felt kind of bad about that, and I know you did too. So whatever you say, it's all fine by me. Who the fuck anyway wants a Christmas tree? 'Cause
The snow keeps on falling, even though we were bad. It'll cover the filth. We should both just be glad. And spend this Christmas together. I married you last year, but you thought I was sober, right? But I was drunk as a skunk and I made a mistake. This could all have been over.
honey, please don't excuse your behavior. 'Cause I hire you to hit me and change your will.
It's now all in my favor. So whatever you say, it's all fine by me. Who the fuck anyway wants a Christmas tree? 'Cause the snow keeps on falling, even though we were bad. It'll cover the filth. We should both just be glad. And spend this Christmas together. 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 Holding on without any reason. 'Cause something strong this holiday season. So whatever you say, it's all fine by me. And who the fuck anyway wants a Christmas tree? 'Cause the snow keeps on falling. Even though we were bad, it'll cover the filth. We should both just be glad